The wacky world of MultimediaJay.
I just read about the Amazon employee who jumped off a 12-story building after being put on a performance improvement plan. I've also read Liz Ryan's articles, as well as articles by HR folks and even some legal firms about PIPs. I think if I ever see something like that anywhere, that's my cue to find another job. Regardless, I can't be depressed about everything today. Let's try and find some way to have some kind of fun sometime before I call it a night. Here's some Logitech Z200 speakers that were on sale for $15 during the Black Friday rush. Actually, Black Friday to Cyber Monday rush. Bought them online. It was kind of one of those, hey, don't forget about the internet. Even though Black Friday is kind of a brick and mortar dinosaur thing, please buy stuff on the internet during the Black Friday rush. Yeah, one of those. I'm going to do some tinkering around with these a little later on and comparing them versus the X series speakers from 2009, 2010, etc. that I have that are also Logitechs in this price range, and see how things have improved or not improved in the last few years. For now, though, I want to actually satiate my curiosity about messing around with this RetroLink emulator controller and this broken NES controller that doesn't work. But first, down fan. Must have more down fan. What's the point of running the heat if it's all going to stay up top, darn it? So here's the situation with this NES controller-ish and this real NES controller that doesn't work. So these emulator controllers have build quality issues in most cases. This RetroLink controller that I originally bought for Shovel Knight, it was cool for a while, but the problem is the plastic is thinner, the circuit board is lighter compared to the original NES controller. And of course there's more angles to the edges and things like that. There's also more action on the select and start buttons as well as the A and B buttons. So I wondered if it would be possible, even if I had to, cut some plastic or something like that, to combine these two together. Because this is an actual Nintendo controller, but it doesn't work. It never worked well in the first place. I think I got this from some random person on Amazon Marketplace or something like that several years ago. But I've kept it around for parts. But I don't think that would really... Well, I want to see what the difference is, and what this will let me do is make use of the screws bowl that I made by taking one of these plastic bowls and writing screws backwards on the bottom of it. So I could theoretically still eat out of this thing because I don't have Sharpie on the bottom, but it's one of the things I'm usually missing. Usually I've been using disposable cups for screws when I take stuff apart, but let's get a little bit more formal and label where the screws go when something is taken apart. Alright. I tried this once before, but I forgot why it is that I didn't follow through on this. So, no big loss if I lose the RetroLink controller either, because I actually do have an NES controller with an NES to USB adapter. So I'm just wondering if we could, combine these two somehow and get a better experience that way. Okay, so there's some circuit board differences. Right? And what does that ultimately mean? First, the board doesn't fit because of this thing right here. So before we go chopping at this to try and get this board to fit inside this controller, let's try swapping all the buttons first onto the emulator controller. I'm just going to call it that, and then use the original board on the emulator controller with the original NES controller's buttons, and take these things and just put them aside. Just put them aside and see how it works. Well, that's one way to learn one thing about Nintendo's controller design back in the day. So I'm able to get some decent action out of this thing, but everything else just feels weird and the B button won't even press. A lot of the problems with the emulator controller has more to do with the rubber underneath and how snappy it is than the plastic shells on top. And that's the issue here. These buttons have a bit more action to them, and they're a bit harder when you press down on them. They feel a little bit cheaper as a result. And it all boils down to the rubber underneath. It could also be the case that the rubber on these is all but brand new, whereas who knows how old this controller was and whatnot. Whoops, we'll pick that up later. This is one of the reasons why I'm curious about the NES Classic, if it can ever actually be in stock somewhere, because a brand new Nintendo controller from back in the day, designed like it was back in the day, if Nintendo uses similar materials, despite the really too short cord and stuff like that, we can compare and see and have something a little bit more current to compare it to, rather than a controller that's broken in from 15 years ago. Someone played Nintendo with it. Now, this is not going to work. This RetroLink, this casing anyways, is only going to work with the buttons and parts that came with it. So the D-pad comes out okay, or cross key if you're a little more old-fashioned that way. Select and start work okay, but the A and B buttons, forget it. The only option you have with the A and B buttons is to convert them back to these snappy things. Doesn't exactly work out too well, and it all boils down to the rubber inside of them. So if we're going to combine these two, we want to put the circuit board from this one inside the broken NES controller, which doesn't work anyways. We're going to have to do some modifications for that, past the point of no return. So, let's try a few things. Okay, the RetroLink parts have been returned to the RetroLink controller, or RetroLink. So these parts are back in here because it's mechanically designed for these sorts of things. Look at this. Look at these extra holes here. I'm guessing there's a Famicom clone type controller similar to this with 2 more buttons or something. But anyways, we know that the Nintendo stuff didn't work. But there's just one thing that's keeping the RetroLink board from fitting in here, and it's this post right here. This is why cutting pliers are called cutting pliers. Okay, both posts have been cut, so now the circuit board can lay over the top of that. The problem we're going to run into is this retention screw does not have a counterpart in the NES controller. So, we're going to have to get this right, then put the cover back on and hope the circuit board doesn't shift. This is weird to say the least. The D-pad's okay, but it warped the controller. It's not flat anymore. Wow. That feels okay though. Let's try playing some Shovel Knight with it. Oh yeah, Shovel Knight, baby. Alright, it's time for a showdown. We have the modded controller. I just took it for a test drive, and it looks like all the buttons work. So we have the modded NES controller with the innards of that emulator controller that goes straight to USB. Sitting out this match is going to be the real Nintendo controller with all Nintendo everything. And on the watch the setup, and on the end, the adapter that goes from NES plug. You can see that there. I gotta see it in the viewfinder too. NES plug to USB. So right off the bat, set the controller right. Let's put the volume up to like 16 or so. I've gotten into the Plague Knight campaign. That's when I stopped playing, as I wasn't really too fond of it. We'll stick to regular Shovel Knight with my completely cleared one, and not New Game Plus. Let's see here. No, I don't want to start New Game Plus. I already have an account for that. Alright. Now we've shown this plane scene so much. It's almost old hat at this time. So, let's play this one. Strike the Earth. Alright, let's compare these controllers here. So we go this, ducking works, jumping I think works. So the A and B buttons have gotten a little bit mushy, or maybe it's just that this controller is just, it was really worn out. This was the controller that didn't work. I got it from I think it was some random person on Amazon Marketplace. Also, the select and the start buttons are a little sunken in because of the different circuit board. I'm actually seriously considering bringing back the parts from the emulator controller inside the NES housing, but at least it won't be ugly off yellow or something. Maybe the A and B buttons and the start and select buttons should be switched over again. This does mean, of course, that I'll have a little bit more action on the A and B buttons. Otherwise, though, this does feel okay, but it doesn't feel quite as solid as a Nintendo controller that actually still has all Nintendo stuff in it. So it's kind of a nice, softer controller. I think I did have some crappy NES controllers back in my NES days that felt like this, where it was the main controller that people played like Double Dragon on a little too much, and things like that. But I'm still able to, even though I'm a little ways away from the screen, I'm still able to do some playing. Okay, we've changed everything up here. Sitting out this round will be, if I can stop tangling my thumb in the cord here, the crappy Nintendo controller that never worked. The interesting part is, there is no adapter this time. It goes straight to USB on the end. Because it's modded, and it feels kind of weird, so it feels lighter too. I'm actually curious if, modded NES controller and regular NES controller with an adapter, can we put these up against the NES Classic whenever that finally becomes available and not getting scalped all over the place on the internet? So I can already tell you that I like the real NES controller more, so there is a mechanical aspect to this. There is a mechanical aspect of this. Oh yeah, this feels much better. I'm actually sorry I chopped up that controller now. But it's not like it worked anyways. So I actually got this NES controller from JJ Games, which is one of the small business e-tailers, as it were, that I was sticking up for on Black Friday and Small Business Saturday. Folks are like, hey, shop local for Small Business Saturday. And I'm like, not every small business is a local business. There is such thing as small business e-tailers, and quite frankly, I think they get the short end of the stick. There's the emphasis on the big box stores for Black Friday, and then Small Business Saturday, people are like, oh yeah, go to the local businesses, as if there is no such thing, and then Cyber Monday is e-tailers, as if there's no middle ground. Yeah. Well, what would be interesting is see if there's a way to get the NES Classic controller, because it's not important to get the NES Classic. I mean, I have a lot of the games that it has on Virtual Console, but I really would like to compare these two controllers with what's coming out on the NES Classic brand new. What's gumming? The heck? I've been experimenting with having more sugar via cereal for breakfast, and it hasn't worked out too well. But yeah, the start and select buttons, they don't feel sunken in, and everything feels way more solid with all NES hardware. So this was a curiosity, per se, but I think adapters really are the way to go, as long as they don't introduce a lot of input lag. Then again, most TVs will introduce input lag in some way, shape, or form. Just because of the difference between CRTs and LCDs and stuff. Alright. At least got back to a scene with some daylight to it. So yes, all things considered, let's turn the dome light back on here. All things considered, I very much prefer the real NES controller with all NES hardware over the modded. I mean, you can see how it's warping, right? Look at this. It kind of drops in the middle. That's because the circuit board inside of it is a little different than what was originally there. But this controller didn't work. So maybe I can make some mechanical adjustments to the controller. I fixed the bulge by cutting some more of these posts in here, because this silicon blob on the circuit board was actually hitting them when I tried to put the controller back together, and it took some damage when I was trying to force everything together like that. That's where the bulge came from, and this is what will fix it. Everything lies flat now. Woohoo! Let's put the controller back together with all Nintendo parts, because we know it feels best when it's all legit, even if the circuit board isn't. Bulge fixed! And it feels like a Nintendo controller again. Unfortunately, the part that got warped is probably going to stay warped, because that's where the bulge was. And of course, some of the support posts are gone, but as long as I'm going to press this and see what happens. Alright, let's go back and play some Shovel Knight with this thing. Straight into USB, no adapters, with an emulator controller's PC board inside a broken NES controller. This is it! This is how you modify a broken Nintendo controller to work using an emulator controller's printed circuit board. So basically, for $20, plus whatever the cost of the broken Nintendo controller is, you basically can get a USB NES controller for games like Shovel Knight. This is kind of nice. Of course, I can tell from how this controller feels that it was very, very worn. This was very heavily used back in its day. But I can definitely imagine myself playing Mario 2 or Mario 3 or Little Nemo the Dream Master or any of those games I used to play back in the day. Nintendo World Cup, I have a lot of them. I have a lot of those games actually that I can use with the Super Retro Trio. Okay, the final battle. I've already played through this with the NES controller with the adapter. We're going to do this with the modded controller, and as an added challenge, no special moves. So no ranged attacks or anything. This is going to be total melee with this guy. Alright. Definitely a lot of button mashing. See if I can stop this guy doing his thing here. Oh, that one. Oh, that was him. Got him! Yep. Although a real NES controller with all NES hardware still feels a little more solid, a modded broken controller with an emulator controller's PC board is close enough that it can be passable. And that, as they say, is that. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by. Broken NES controller innards and the exterior pieces of the emulator controller. Then the great sift continues.